I am so excited to see you all today. We have a lesson planned on listening today, which is, I think, one of those most overlooked topics, but I also think that listening is really important for us to focus on. Really quickly, I would like to go over a couple of reminders for the next upcoming week. So the first things first, remember that we do have our interpersonal theory and presentation due next week. So what's going to happen is that, at this week, you are submitting your reflection post number 6. Reflection post number 6 is based on your reading, on your selection of the topics. So again, like I reminded you last time, online, there are a list of theories, like a full of list of about 17 theories that you can choose from. Choose the one that you're most interested in, but before you actually choose and set it in stone, make sure you know what the theory is about, because once you choose a theory and once you get it approved, that's the theory that you're going to be doing for your entire paper. So make sure that the theory that you pick is one that you like. Two, so make sure that you do that. Once you research the theory and you know which one you want, make sure that you submit your reflection post number 6. The sooner that you submit it, the quicker I will approve it. I will be going over them tomorrow just to see if any of you have already submitted and selected your theory, and I will be approving them first comes first serve. Remember that if there's 2 people already doing a theory, you're going to have to move on to the next one, because the maximum amount of people that I can have per theory, it's 2, so that it doesn't seem redundant. Also, your paper and your presentation are going to be due next Friday at 11:59 p.m. The presentation will be done through an application called Flipgrid. Basically, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to go out of your way. All you have to do is click on the assignment that's going to be on Canvas, and it's going to take you to the Flipgrid application where you can film your presentation. With that being said, next week we have no Zoom classes. I'm giving you the entire week to work on your paper and your presentation. There will be no readings. The only focus for next week will be your paper. So again, no Zoom classes next week, no readings, no other assignments beside your interpersonal paper and your presentation. I want all your focus to be on that, because I want you all to do really well on that. So those are the reminders. So this week we'll have our Zoom lesson. And then next week you will be working on your paper the entire week. So there's going to be nothing else for you to do besides the paper and the presentation. And with that being said, let us get started for today. So today we're going to be talking about listening. And like I said at the very beginning, listening is one of those topics that we tend to overlook, just because we don't think that listening is as important as it is. And it's actually hard work. If you ever have been in an environment where there's a lot of noise going around and you're just trying to focus on one message, it is harder than what it looks. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let me share my PowerPoint with you all. So we're going to be talking about listening. And by the end of this week, we're going to be meeting the following objectives. The first one being, we're going to be able to define listening. We have to be able to know what listening is in order for us to put it into practice. Listening is different from hearing. So we're going to define what listening is. We're also going to list the steps in the 5-stage model of listening. The model of listening has 5 steps. In order for you to have listened successfully to a message, you have to go through all 5 steps. We're also going to talk about different listening barriers, and we're going to discuss what are ways to overcome these barriers. And finally, we're going to identify the styles of effective listening. There are different types of listening for different purposes. And each one of these styles, you can basically adapt your listening to whichever context, the style, whatever context the context requires, and that's the style that you're going to use. So those are the 4 objectives that we're going to be meeting in this week's lesson. So let us get started. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to define listening. We can't jump into anything else until we understand what listening is. So when we talk about listening, we refer to the process of 1, receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, and responding to a message. So as you can see, the definition of listening already has the 5 steps of the 5-stage model, which is step number 1, receiving. Step number 2 is understanding, remembering, evaluating, and responding. So those are the 5 steps of the 5-stage model of listening. And all these 5 steps can apply to both verbal, which are written and spoken, or nonverbal, which are, the body language, anything else that's not a word, right? It can apply to both verbal and nonverbal messages. So you can be engaging in effective listening if you're just reading the nonverbal messages of a person. That is also considered to be listening, because that contributes to the meaning behind the message. So again, listening is a process. It has 5 steps, which are receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, and responding. And it applies to both nonverbal and verbal messages. So again, listening also involves you reading and interpreting body language. All right, so now that we know what listening is, let's move on to the 5 stages of listening. But before we do that, I have a little discussion that I want us to do. Obviously, it wouldn't be my class if we didn't have some media reference to it, so that it helps us understand it a little bit better. So as you probably all know, I have this really weird obsession with the 50 Shades franchise of films. And the reason why is not because the movie was that good or anything like that, right? The movie was horrible, script was all over the place. And don't even get me started on the books, that I couldn't even get through the first chapter of the first book because of all the spelling and grammatical errors that the author had. But I think the reason why I like these films and I use them in the class is because they're just filled with, things going on that are so wrong for relationships, right? So everything that both Christian Grey and Anastasia Steele do is it's a mess, right? So this is what not to do in a relationship. So I want us to watch this clip from the movie 50 Shades of Grey, and then in breakout rooms, I want you to answer the following questions. So the clip is from the first movie, and I want you to answer the following questions. 1, what does Anna want Christian to do? 2, what is Christian's response to her request? And I want you to tell me, based on that interaction that you see, do you think he was listening to her concerns? Why or why not? And again, like I said, this movie is just filled with so many problems. I think the relationship is just a mess. And if it wasn't a film, that relationship would be heading south. Anyways, let's check out the clip. And obviously we have an ad as well. What can I say about that?
Great apartment, and the rent's not ridiculous. Elliot and Jose helped us move in. Jose is Anna's friend, although I think that Elliot's trying to poach him. They start quite the bromance.
He's a cool guy. Anna, where is your family from?
My stepfather lives in Montesano and my mom's in Georgia.
Georgia? Which part?
Savannah.
How nice. Although I do hear it gets rather humid in Georgia this time of year.
Oh my God, it does. It's stifling sometimes. Actually, I'm going to visit her tomorrow.
Oh, how nice.
Mm-hmm.
You hear that, Christian? Some children do visit their parents now and again.
Hey, Dad, you catch the Mariners game? I heard it went to extra.
Oh, Seattle baseball. C'est la quintessence du conventional.
I don't know what you just said, but it sounded like going.
Who wants coffee?
Actually, I promised Anna a tour of the grounds. Excuse us.
Christian, I cannot walk that fast in these shoes. Oh!
When are you going to tell me about Georgia?
What? You have no right to be mad.
Yeah, but I am mad. Palm twitchingly mad.
Ow!
You're mine. All mine. Understand?
Christian, you are so confusing.
Anna,
What do you want? What do you want?
I want you.
I'm trying, Christian.
I know you are.
Why can't we sleep in the same bed? Why won't you let me touch you? Why does it have to be like this?
If you just signed the contract, you wouldn't have to think
Why do you
about
care
it.
so much about the contract, Christian? Don't you like me the way I am?
Of course I do.
Then why are you trying to change me?
I'm not. It's
I need more. I want more.
hearts and flowers. That's not something I know. And a place. It's you that's changing me.
Let me touch you. Let me. Are they burns?
I had a rough start in life. That's all you need to know.
All right, so besides that horrible, how horribly written it was, let me send you to breakout rooms. And again, remember, what does Anna want Christian to do? What is Christian's response? And based on the interaction, do you think he was listening to her concerns? Why or why not? Let me send you onto breakout rooms. All right, so let us talk about the whole 50 Shades situation, besides the fact that it was like really, cringeworthy. Let's just talk about it.
I think it's Oscar worthy.
Oh God, that thing was horrible. Like even myself, like I said, I like these movies just because like I think it's filled with stuff that we can examine, but it was pretty horrible to watch. Anyways, so based on what we saw on the clip, what does Anna want Christian to do?
Pretty much Anna wants Christian to act more like a boyfriend in a sense, she wants him to open up to her, like be vulnerable around him, be himself around him. But of course, he always brings up that contract.
I know, right? And with that being said, you kind of led us to the next question. What is Christian's response? What does he want?
It seems like he wants to have sex. All he cared was about sex. He's touching her and everything during the minute, and I don't understand much of the contract or what he has because I never seen it. So I would like to know what's the contract about. What is he talking about? Because she's telling him something, and the other thing that got my attention was the fact that he's telling him, "You're mine." It's like she cannot think for herself or make decisions because he has to approve them, and I don't know if that's part of the contract or not.
That is so interesting that you're bringing that up. So just to like, for those of you who haven't watched the film, just to give you a background. So this whole film, it's a spin-off on Twilight. So the lady who wrote 50 Shades of Grey, she was like a big fan of Twilight, and she wrote this like fan fiction based on Twilight. So the character of Christian Grey is based on Edward Cullen, which is like really weird. And then Anastasia Steele is based on Bella Swan. So like if you have seen Twilight, you see that like Edward is like overprotective, and he's overprotective, and Bella is like super vulnerable and like weak and whatnot. So like this lady wrote a fan fiction that became like this best-selling novel, which is horribly written, and then it became the movies. So basically what it is this like relationship of like like of BDSM. So like the BDSM culture, so like bondage, sadomasochism type of culture. That's the best way that I can explain it. And it was really interesting because like my husband, when we were dating, he actually took me to see the premiere of this film, and there was a bunch of people like lining out outside who were people who belong to the BDSM culture, saying that this movie wasn't like representing it properly, because it made kind of like light of their culture, like it made them seem like there were like predators, possessive, and all of that, and it's not about that. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So it's like the contract is basically like in a lot of these relationships, they have like a contract in which like you accept that you are the person submissive, and that what is the behavior that's accepted, what's the behavior that's not permitted. So hopefully that makes sense, Patricia.
Basically, the kind of culture, no, sorry, not the kind of culture, the kind of contract that he's like referring to is an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. So pretty much like once you sign that, you can't talk about what you do with that person, or you can get sued.
Oh, okay, makes sense. Thank you, Karen.
Welcome.
Thank you, Professor.
No problem. When he was all angsty saying your mind, yeah, it is like definitely fan fiction. And again, like this lady, like she was just like a stay-at-home wife, and she just like obsessed over Twilight, and she wrote this book, and she became famous and all of that. But it's really interesting because like, yeah, the relationship is kind of like this power dynamic where he wants to control her, like Patricia was saying, and that's his response. His response is just like, I don't care what you're saying, I just care about like the physical part of this relationship. That's like all I care about. So based on this interaction, do you think he was listening to her concerns? Why or why not? Was he listening to her concerns? Why?
No, because in his mind he has what he wanted. And no matter what she was saying, he's like, oh, I can do flowers and hearts and flowers. It's like she wasn't talking about that. She was talking more like a meaningful. That's what we agree in the group, the more meaningful relationship. But he's more superficial, and he wants what he wants.
And I love how like a lot of you are saying that this is just one big Wattpad story, basically. Oh God, so like Twilight started this like whole like chain effect. So Twilight kind of like inspired 50 Shades, and then like 50 Shades kind of inspired like the Wattpad story after, which is based on Harry Styles and all the people from like, what's it called? Oh my God, what's that group called? I forgot. One Direction. There you go. I was like, I'm like, I don't even remember. Okay, so I also watched those films again just because of like, I wanted to see how similar it was. And again, it's like this theme of this like very like possessive man and this very vulnerable woman who at the very end kind of like becomes in charge. And the guy is like super crazy and like has like issues or whatnot. So I'll probably bring one of those clips when we get to like how direct relationships develop, the different types of love. So I'll probably bring one of those clips up for then. that is really interesting. So yeah. So hopefully that was entertaining for us to watch. It was like I said, I actually went to see the film like when it came out, and it came out on Valentine's Day. I think it was like in 2015. Valentine's Day in 2015, and I actually went to see it, and there was like this huge protest of like, there was like the people who belong to the BDSM culture saying this doesn't represent us, and on the other side was a bunch of like, you know, religious folks saying this is like sinful, like don't go watch this. So it was a real interesting dynamic to see. Anyways, moving on, let's talk about the 5 stages of the listening process. Like we said, there are 5 stages, and in the definition of listening, the 5 stages are listed. The first one is receiving, and the receiving message is when you finally like kind of like start notice what is being said. So it requires focus, right? So you're hearing a bunch of noise in the background, and when you decide to focus on something, that's when the receiving part starts. Also, one of the really interesting things that I noticed in this section is when we talk about receiving, sometimes we use this disclaimers. And when we use disclaimers, it's because we want the reader, the listener, to receive the messages without thinking that we're negative. So for example, like the hedging and the expertise type of thing, like, so for example, hedging would be something like, oh, I don't know, but I think that blah, 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 blah. Usually like hedging is often seen in feminine style of communication. It's kind of like kind of to soften the message that's about to come next. Like, so for example, the no offense but type of message, right? It's to soften the message that comes after, to kind of like prevent the person from feeling that negative reaction to the message. There's also the expertise, like, I did a lot of exercise, so I think that blah, 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 right? So sometimes when we are kind of like sending a message to a particular listening, we use these types of disclaimers to make sure that the person who's listening, so the listener, doesn't receive the message with, they don't have that negative reaction to the messages we're putting out there. So when somebody tells you like, no offense, but, you already know you're about to be offended, right? So, but we use those disclaimers to avoid the negative reaction that the person will have towards us. The second stage of the listening process is understanding. And the stage of understanding is you listen to the verbal message, so you understand the words, but you also read the emotions and the thoughts behind it. So in the receiving stage is when you're only focusing, is when you focus just like exactly on the verbal part, the understanding, grasps the verbal and nonverbal part behind it. Also, one of the things that's really important in the second stage of the listening process is don't assume that you know what the person is saying until you actually finish listening to the person. One of the things that we often tend to assume, and mostly when there's like some type of like disagreement or something like that with the other person you're talking to, is that you know what they're saying and you know what's behind their message. But it turns out that you never really know. So if you are having questions, understanding, if you think you know, but you're not really sure, the best way is to ask questions. It helps you avoid any misunderstandings. And I don't know if it's because of the way that we've been raised culturally or anything like that, but we tend to like not want to ask questions when we are listening to a person, maybe because of the fear that the person might think that we're not really listening to them. But again, I encourage you to ask questions so that you don't end up assuming something that's not true. Step number 3 is remembering. Remembering is really important because if you cannot remember what the person said, you didn't really listen, right? if you listen to a person, you should be able to take this information and be able to recall it at a later time. So for example, and I have been told by my friends that I'm actually like really good at remembering things. And I don't know if it's because of my field of study or if it's because I teach. I'm like, I remember more of these things, or if it's I listen more, I don't even know. But usually, you know, if somebody will tell me something, I will remember a few weeks later and I will ask you about it. That's a great way of showing that you listen, by being able to recall that information and bring it up at a later time. Also, in the remembering stage, there's a difference between short-term versus long-term memory. Can somebody tell me the difference between short-term memory and long-term memory? Anybody know the difference between the two?
Short term is when you don't recall little details that happened like an hour or a day ago, and then long term is like events that happened like way back when.
Awesome, thank you, Karen. So short-term memory is the memory that you just use to kind of like, you remember just long enough to be able to either write it down or just like, for those of you who like didn't like a particular subject in school, right? And you just like studied for that particular exam, and after you took the exam, you completely forgot about it. That's an example of short-term memory. My aunt hates math, right? And one of the things that she always did, and she keeps telling me, is that when you're like, I asked her, like, how did you even pass calculus when you were in high school, right? Like, if you hate math so much. She doesn't even like remember certain times tables at this point. And she was like, oh, like I just like memorized it enough to take the test. And then after the test, I didn't remember it anymore. So that's an example of short-term memory. And like Karen said, long-term memory is something that you can remember longer, right? For a longer period of time. So our goal for listening is not to have that short-term memory, but to have long-term memory, right? To be able to recall it 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, and demonstrate that we were actually focusing and listening on that message. Next up, we are going to talk about evaluating. So evaluating is the part of the listening process when you judge the message in some sort of way. So for example, if you're talking to someone and your friend's like, oh, you know, like I'm having a really hard time with my boyfriend or something like that, and you are, you know, you're evaluating it like, oh my God, here we go again. This is another thing that she brings up all the time, right? Or if you say, oh man, I feel really bad for her, that's horrible, right? So that's the judging the message in some sort of way. So my example, we're gonna go back to my ordeal with the wedding of my friend, because, you know, every week we come up with something different. So as I told you before, my friend and the other girl, you know, there was a group of us, right? And the other girl, the other bridesmaid and myself, no longer friends, right? We dislike each other. So mostly she dislikes me. I don't really dislike her that much, but anyways. So the biggest situation that happened now is that the this other woman, she didn't want to buy the bridesmaid's dress because she said it was too expensive, right? And she was saying like, oh, I don't want to be part of the wedding because the dress is like $200, which is like usually how much bridesmaids dresses are. She was like, oh, I don't want to be in the wedding anymore. I can't afford this dress, whatnot, right? And then what ended up happening is that my friend, instead of like, her and I both interpret the message in different ways. Like we both evaluated it differently. So my friend, the bride, she was like, oh, like, poor person, I am going to, her birthday's coming up. So let me give her like, let me buy her the dress as a birthday present to her. So like the bridesmaid dress to her own wedding, she is purchasing it for this other woman, right? So she interpreted the message as it's like, oh, I want her, she's my best friend. I want her to be part of this wedding. I feel bad. So like, poor girl, like, let me buy her the dress. Me listening to the same message, I judged it in a different way. I was just like, wow, like, $200 is a big amount for everybody else. And, in my family, my husband has to buy his like groomsman suit and stuff. And we have to buy my daughter's flower girl dress. So you can imagine that that's about like $500 for all of us or more, $500 to $700 for all of us, right? And I'm just thinking like, and she can't buy a $200 dress, like, and I have to pay like $700 for all of like our stuff. Like my husband and I, we have to pay those $700. So I judged it in a negative way, saying like, why is she complaining? She shouldn't even have to dish out that much. My friend, the bride, was like, oh, I feel bad for her. I want her to be part of the wedding. So I'm going to purchase a dress. So we both listened to the same message, but we both obviously evaluated it in different ways. which kind of like is not fun because now I have to dish out $700 and this other girl gets, this other woman gets her dress for free, basically. So I love that for myself, right? Last time is responding. So when you are listening, you have to respond. There are two types of responses, like the immediate response or the immediate feedback and delayed feedback. So one of the things that a lot of people have a difficult time with is understanding whether another person is listening to them or not. The reason why is because the other person might not be giving them any immediate feedback. Usually immediate feedback is referred by your nonverbal behavior, like the nodding of the head, you know, the kind of like sounds like, like, you know, eye contact, moving closer to the person, that those nonverbal signs kind of like demonstrate that you're responding, that you're listening, right? The delay feedback can be seen as actually like responding like verbally and letting the person know verbally how you feel after they're done with the message. So the biggest tip that I can give you when it comes to responding to messages is like, always let the speaker know you're listening through nonverbal messages as they are telling you the story. Don't just sit there like stoically, just like staring at them, because that doesn't give the speaker like any idea or any indication that you're listening. You have to use some type of nonverbals like nodding, eye contact, moving closer, maybe like using some other type of nonverbal gestures to let them know that you're actually listening. Otherwise, person will not know that you're listening to them. So that is that. Okay. So now that we talked about the 5 stages of the listening process, we are going to talk about listening barriers. So there are many listening barriers that we can face. I'm going to talk about the few that I think are most common. The first one is the physical and mental distraction. So I can understand that there can be a lot of noise in the environment that gets in the way of us listening to a message. So for example, when my dogs are acting insane in the background during our lectures and they're barking and like fighting with each other, that is a type of environmental physical distraction. It gets in the way of receiving the message, right? It distracts us, it makes us focus on something else rather than the lecture that I am giving to you all. There's also the thoughts. The thought is when, like, for example, your friend is telling you about their day and you are daydreaming about what you're going to do later. You are thinking about the bunch of assignments that you have to do, or you are dreaming of that burrito that you're going to eat. So those are mental distractions. And one of the things that we have to do is that every time we have those mental distractions, try to like reel us back in, try to like focus back on the conversation. And every time that we're trying to like kind of like deviate into like daydreaming area, just keep bringing ourselves back. As for the environment, it's really difficult, mostly if you can't move out of that place. So just try to bring yourself to focus on the main points that the person is telling you about. There's also biases and prejudices that get in the way of our listening barriers. So one of the things that happens is like if somebody is telling you something that you disagree with or that you already have a disliking for or disapproval for, that's where the close-mindedness goes into. So I know that there's some people that like as soon as you say something that they disagree with, they'll stop listening, right? And I know that we all have those things. Like for example, like I have this friend who we were really close friends in high school. Fast forward 13 years later, I ran into her at Target, which was so random, right? I ran into her at Target at like 10 p.m. at night because I was picking milk for my daughter. And my husband and I were just around there, and I ran into her just by myself. And she approached me. She's like, "Hey, I haven't seen you since like we graduated high school. Like, how are you?" Like, and she saw that I was carrying like a gallon of milk and that I had some Paw Patrol slippers in my hands. And then she's like, "Oh, who are those for?" And she doesn't have any social media, mind you. And I was like, "Oh, they're for my daughter." And she's like, "You have a kid?" And I said, "Yes, I have." At that time, my daughter was 3. I have a 3-year-old. And she's like, "Oh," she's like, "You're married?" Yes. I said, "Yes, I'm married." And she's like, "Do I know your husband?" And I was like, "Yes, you do." She had a huge crush on my husband in high school. And I was like, "Yeah, you do know who he is." And then my husband came out of like, I don't know what he was doing. I think he was trying to grab some like chips. And he came out of the aisle and he's like, "Do you want the hot Cheetos or do you want this?" And then she saw him and she's like, "Wait, why are you guys together?" And I'm like, "He's my husband. We're married." And then she's like, no way, you guys actually got married. And then, she was making plans for us to go out. And then she told us like, oh, I don't like kids. I hate children. And she told that to both of us, and we're parents, right? And like when you're a parent, like your child is like, God's gift to the universe, right? And I'm just like, okay, I was like, sure, like let's go have drinks. I didn't block her out. Then I was just listening to what she had to say. And I was like, well, it makes sense. She doesn't have kids, just to know what joy they are. Some people just don't like that in their life. That's totally fine, And I was more open-minded, and my husband's like, let me stop you right there. He was like, let's just go. We have to go. And I was telling him, I was like, why didn't you just like, talk to her, like hear her out? And he said, well, because like she said she didn't like kids. And from that moment on, she dead to me. And then I was like, yeah, but you didn't listen to what she had to say. She works like at this really cool company. She could hook it up for you. And he's like, I don't care. I just can't have anybody in my life who doesn't like children when we have our daughter, right? And, like we got into a huge argument, but my husband from that moment on, he was like, nope, no, people who don't like kids cannot be friends with me. And no, she actually, it's not that she said, and Asia, you bring up a good point. We weren't going to bring her with us anyways. We never bring our daughter out to any gatherings with other people. We just don't do that. We don't want to impose. She was just like, she just didn't want us to like, she didn't ever want to meet her. She didn't ever want to like interact with her. That's where the problem, I think, kind of starts, because we understand like not bringing our daughter to like Yard House. I mean, that's totally understandable, but usually like people who are friends with us, they have to meet her. Like she's part of our life. But anyways, my husband was like, nope, you don't like kids, we can't be friends. And they were really close in high school too, so I don't know. Also, we want to make sure that we avoid any discriminatory listening. So there are, people tend to discriminate on people based on age, race, sexual orientation, and sex. So for example, there are some of us who, older people are trying to give us advice, and we're like, oh God, like here they go again, giving us advice, and you tune them out. Or there's somebody, there's like, usually like females tend to get discriminated in workplace. And when like, a female is in a position of power and they're kind of like telling somebody else what to do, a lot of people, or some people, tend to just like discriminate based on like the fact that they're female. Like, you don't want to listen to them because of that. Hopefully we're getting better as a society, but this still happens to like women who are CEOs, who are managers, who are in a position of power, and they have like people that they have to like, train and provide direction for. And usually this tends to happen in a lot of workplaces. Next, any premature judgment. This is what happens when you're judging the message before it's finished. So again, my husband is so guilty of this. He's so guilty of doing this. And I always like call him out on it, because he already is like super annoyed because, again, back to the whole wedding situation, the groom wants to go fishing for his bachelor party, okay? And my husband's like, that is so boring. Like, why can't we like go eat food and like do something else? And then even before kind of like the groom kind of like finished explaining what the itinerary for the whole bachelor weekend was, my husband's like, just a moment, he said fishing. That's it. I'm like done with that. And then I actually like looked at the itinerary, and there was like fishing, there's go-karting, there's hiking, there's swimming. And like the groom is a very active guy. Like him and my husband ran track and field, and the groom still runs a lot. And my husband just doesn't run anymore, but he wants to do a lot of like active things. And my husband's like, why can't we just go to Buffalo Wings and call it a night, And I'm just like, oh God. But anyways, like eventually he's like, yeah, I guess it doesn't sound that bad when you tell me all the other things that we're going to do. So that's that. So he was getting into that premature judgment, trying to judge that the weekend was going to be boring without actually listening to all the other stuff that was going to happen that weekend. Now he's kind of like excited about it. So hopefully he doesn't give the groom or myself a hard time about that. And with that being said, folks, we are done for today. Make sure that you are reading chapter 6 and you're finishing the chapter. Also, do not forget to submit your reflection post number 6 as ASAP, because you want to make sure that the theory that you pick gets approved for you. And I will be actually grading them as we go along. And yes, I agree with you, Kevin. B-dubs is like the best thing ever. Unfortunately, like you know, for the bachelor, for the bridal shower, we're going to end up at, oh my god, where were we gonna end up? Like some like really like fancy place. And I'm just like, oh yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the wedding pics, people. Like, the dress is hideous. The dress is hideous, and
That will be nice.
it's hideous. It's such a hideous dress.
We want to see you, Professor.
Well, just like hope that it goes for the best. Yes, not to judge, but like the dress is hideous.
You look good, Professor. Stop putting yourself down.
No, like the dress is actually pretty horrific.
You look good, but the dress is not.
So like, and like I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, can somebody look worse than me so that I don't feel that bad? But yes, I do feel like the wedding drama is like perfect for this class, and I'm glad that it's happening right now. Too bad that you won't be able to actually see the pictures because the wedding is in December, on December 22nd, like really near Christmas, so you won't be able to see the pictures. Unless you take another class with me in the future, then you might be able to show them. Anyways, Patricia, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just submitted my request for the theory today. And you said you were, and also it's funny, my mom had canceled the cable, it disconnected the Wi-Fi. So I missed some of the things you were speaking. It just stopped after your friend at the store said that she doesn't like children and that your husband wasn't happy with it.
Yes.
And I wasn't happy with it too. It was like, I have a child. Somebody tells me that, screw them. I don't want to go out with them.
Yeah, I totally understood his point, but I was just like, so at this point, you know, I'm not gonna change her mind. But
Sure.
yes, so I will be, like I said, I will be looking at the post sometime in the afternoon today. I will be grading the first ones that are there. I will be looking at them like on a daily basis, and I will getting through them. But again, if you already see that 2 of your classmates have already selected a theory, move on to the next one, okay? And with that being said, you are done for today. I will see you on Thursday. Hopefully there's no more wedding drama.
I wish
I guess I will like take a picture during the fitting.
Thank you.
I'll take a picture and I'll show you how hideous that thing is. But yeah, I just can't get over the red heels that I have to wear. Ugh. Anyways, I will see you all on Thursday. Make sure to get that stuff done.
have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
fun this weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.